Welcome to the Best Living Show. I'm your host, Dr. Rachelle Sweet. Breathe, eat, sleep, thrive in every aspect of your life. What does thriving actually mean? Thriving is not a word, it's an action, a way of living. And that's what the Best Living Show is all about. So get ready, step into a new narrative, and find a new way of being. There's a beautiful connection, a spark that flies at the intersection between the genetic code and your internal guidance system. We're going to throw away the culture that will tell us that thriving is something only for a few. Every one of us is unique. It's our time to discover why. The Best Living Show starts now. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Best Living Show. I am your host, Dr. Rachelle Sweet, and I am so excited today because we have Dr. Jahnke with us. And he is going to be, bringing us some ancient wisdom and some modern science as far as it goes to breath. He is one of the most respected luminaries in the field of evidence-based mind-body practice and wellness, integrative medicine, Chinese medicine for self-transformation. He has dedicated his professional life to sharing the ancient holistic empowerment and healing traditions of China and distilling it for our contemporary times. He has written a couple of books. One of them I have here, which is The Healer Within, which is about using basic Chinese techniques to release your own internal medicine, body medicine. So I know that that is something that is near and dear to my heart because it's really working on our epigenetics because all of this is informing information to our body. He also wrote a second groundbreaking book, The Healing Promise of Qi, and this is creating extraordinary wellness through Qigong and Tai Chi, and really stills those practices down for the modern time. So it's really taking the old and bringing it into the new. So help me welcome Dr. Roger to the Best Living Show. How are you doing?
I am fantastic. Thank you so much for inviting me, and I'm looking forward to our time together.
Yes, I'm very excited about it. And we had talked a little bit about Chinese wisdom and how that all started many thousands of years ago, and was really kind of the invention, the beginning of wellness and wellness coaching. And you had expressed to me about a type of philosophy, the grandmother medicine, which I loved, which we call young Shang. I think I'm pronouncing it correctly.
Yeah, so how it goes is, first of all, if we think about it for just a few minutes, the guys, we're talking about 100,000 years ago, the guys were typically larger and stronger than women. And so the women sent them out with sticks and stones to try to bring down large animals and so forth, and do some of the gathering. But most of the gathering from the hunter and gathering era was done by the women, because that's food and medicine.
Right.
So every culture in the world that developed a kind of medicine, which every culture did, basically derived that from the wisdom of women who were also probably a little more interested than the guys in things like stars and seasons and moon cycles and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
So first of all, just we're raising our palm and saying ho, and thank you very much to the grandmothers.
Yes.
And then as the Chinese tribes developed all of this, it trended in the direction of creating categories of personal behavior. So in other words, not diagnostic categories for disease, but personal categories for behavior. So that would be nutrition and rest and communication skills and exposure to nature and hydration and meditation and all of the aspects of what we would call mind-body practice, which Chinese call Qigong, and Kung Fu, which is Kung Fu is the more dynamic side, and Qigong is more the flowing, gentle side of the mind-body practices from China. And all of that together, which also includes herbal medicine and grandmother's wisdom for how to have a good relationship and raise your children and so forth, all of that is called Yang Sheng, which means nourishing life. So it doesn't mean diagnosing and treating diseases. It means nourishing life. And as you can imagine, in those days, we didn't have hospitals or drugstores or clinics or any of that. So the best idea was to keep people well in the first place. So they didn't need extraordinarily supreme or extreme medical measures, because they were doing daily, reasonable, personal, behavioral measures.
Yeah, that ounce of prevention, right? that we've
That's the one.
been passed down from our grandmothers, that ounce of prevention. Now, one of the things that you talked about within this idea of nourishing life is mindfulness and breath work, which, you know, is very interesting to me. I've been researching it quite a bit within the epigenetic space and seeing how that really informs our body. And you also tell a story in your book about, I think her name was Patricia, and how she was in an accident, and how breath is really like, it gave her new life, right?
Yes. So what the Chinese call Qigong is made up of 4 parts. A body part, which has to do with movement and postural adjustment and etc. A breath part, which we'll talk more about. A mindfulness part, which is to be self-aware and moderate our actions relative to our purposefulness in this life, rather than our habituated patterns and default networks and so forth. And then the 4th part of Qigong is self-applied massage. And so we'll be talking more about the breath, of course, but this woman basically knew nothing about these things. And I met her. She came up to me after a lecture at the National Wellness Institute, where I gave a keynote at one point, and she said, you know, all that stuff you were talking about, I have a really personal experience with that, because I almost died. I was in the hospital, and I had this oxygen or this breathalyzer thing nearby, and they could tell that I was breathing and so forth by the little ball that would go up and down in the thing. And then I figured out, because she said, I read in the Bible that, you know, God gave us breath, and breath is the foundation of our life and all that. And so I started experimenting with breathing deeper on purpose. And I noticed that I could make that ball go a little higher. And over time, I was able to kind of get into a rhythm with that. And the doctors said, you know, they didn't say this to me, they said it to my parents or whoever was there, that, you know, I was probably going to die, because my spleen was crushed, and a couple of bones and broken and all that stuff, and that they would be able to tell if I was still alive in maybe like 12 hours that I could make it. And so I actually, between passing out and being in a kind of brief little comas, I was able to come back to this breath thing. And then in the morning, they said, you win. And I just thought that was such a great, practical, contemporary, unsolicited testimonial for the value of purposefully modifying the breath.
Yeah, I mean, it fits right into kind of what my philosophy is with the intentional thriving, like that we wake up, become mindful, and are more intentional about everything we do, breathing, eating, sleeping, because if we can be more intentional and be more mindful, then we can really tap into what our body is saying to us, and what we have, that innate, as you call it, that innate healer within, that energy, right? The energy force that the Chinese call qi, and use that to heal. And I've even had other doctors say, yeah, medicine, they can give you a pill or a Band-Aid, but it's really just a stopgap to give your body time to heal, because it's got to put that medicine to work. And so while medicine is needed for obviously catastrophic things like Patricia's accident, they in that story, they really just kept her stabilized so that she could awaken that medicine, that grandmother medicine, and through her breath, she was able to.
Fortunately,
Yeah.
They didn't say you can do this.
No, they didn't. But something tapped into her. Call it divine wisdom, because it said, "Remember the Bible, the breath of life." And I didn't even realize that the Bible had that kind of context with the breath of life in there. And I thought, oh, that's so interesting. And I know you talk about how people don't really pay attention to their breath, and I feel like it's one of the most important things. Without breath, there is no life, right?
It's so with important. Us wherever we go.
Yep.
When we wake up in the middle of the night and can't sleep, the breath is still there with us to help us make the medicine within that will actually put us back to sleep. Yeah. So powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. So we're going to take a short break here in a few seconds, but I wanted to let you know you're going to want to stay tuned, because we are going to be talking about breath medicine. And we're going to be also, Dr. Roger is going to go over some archetypal breath methods that you can use. So you're going to want to stay tuned to hear all about that. So you're listening to Best Living Show with Dr. Rachelle Sweet, and we'll be right back after we take a quick break. Hello, and welcome back to the Best Living Show with Dr. Rachelle Sweet. And joining me today is Dr. Roger, and he is my esteemed guest, and we are talking about breath medicine. And we were just talking about the ancient wisdom and the grandmother medicine. And before we get started, will you just give the listeners an idea of where they can find out more about you, where they can contact you with interest of what you do?
Sure. Well, first, it's good if I spell my last name, because nobody knows how to say it. I don't even know how to say it. It's Jahnke. My first name is Roger. So if you go to YouTube and put in my name, and then, it would help if you put in the word Tai Chi or the word Qigong. Qigong is Qigong. Find a bunch of videos there. We have a website which is associated with the organization that I am the director of, which is the Institute for Integral Qigong and Tai Chi. Qigong is spelled Qigong, and Tai Chi is 2 words, Tai, second word, Chi. So anyway, the website is very simple. It's simply iiqtc.org, iiqtc.org. So
yeah, and I'm going to also have those on my own website too, drrachelsweet.com. You'll see on the podcast page, we will have that information, some of those links there too, for YouTube and for Facebook and Instagram. All right, so I want to go back a little bit to the ancient teachings of the Chinese and how we conceptualize that within self-healing. And then how does that work with traditional healing? We talked a little bit about that, but let's expand on that now.
Yeah, so we live in a society that, for better or worse, has become enchanted with science. I myself am totally enchanted with science. In fact, as a person from a German heritage, from a place called Cincinnati, Ohio, I'm in California now. I'm a little more suited to California. But Cincinnati was an amazing place to grow up. And we were very based in both the exercise of science as a way of being able to be sure of things. And then we were also very interested in our religions, which my family was Methodists and Presbyterians and, all that sort. And so we lived very comfortably in a world where science was important and God was important.
Right.
And I love that. It's just like like harmonious association. But we've really gotten hooked up on a very difficult situation where science and religion are not really cohabiting
Right. They're
very
separated. Yeah.
comfortably. And so a lot of times when we want to try to figure something out, we go with science.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the things that's really interesting to understand is what science means, what the word science means. And it basically means to observe. So it doesn't mean cutting things up, and it doesn't mean boiling things down, although you can cut things up and you can boil things down. But the operational feature of it is exploring how things work. And so if we now imagine, when did people start exploring how things work? And given science kicked in, let's say in the 19th century, that'd be the 1800s. Okay, so we can go earlier. We could say, before Darwin and so forth, we had Newton and Galileo, and they were scientists. But if we go back 100,000 years, it isn't appropriate to say that there was no science.
Right.
It's only appropriate to say that they had a different kind of science. And by the way, if you look at the word conscience,
Mm-hmm.
the word science is in it, and the word
Right.
con means with. So
Mm-hmm.
science is observation, and conscience and science come together to make a word. What does the word mean? Well, it means basically by being alert,
Right.
paying attention. And of course, you can pay attention to the world outside through looking and microscopes and telescopes, but you can also look inside. And the
Right.
scientists of the ancient world were very interested in observing both internally and externally and reflecting on the idea that the science of looking internally and the science of looking externally had some similar qualities. Basically, just being mindful and attentive and letting the external world show you what it does, and to let the internal world show you what it does. And neither one of those says that somebody else is going to tell you what the world is doing or what you
Right.
are doing. And
Yeah.
so the foundation of ancient science is this powerful self-determinism around personal observation
Right.
internally and externally. So language, when did language start? Well, the human gene comes out of the primate gene pool, and the primate gene pool is very communicative.
Mm-hmm.
So what that means is that if the human gene is 3 million years ago and the primate gene is older than that, then humans were already communicating 3 million years ago.
Right.
So then
Right.
when did they codify? When did they make that into systematic frameworks? Well, we know that if we go to the shamanic traditions that did not write things down, so that would be the shamans of the Americas, they never wrote anything down.
Right.
And even in China, the tribes didn't start writing until about 5,000 years ago.
Right.
So that means that somewhere between 5,000 years ago and 3 million years ago, the ideas about how to be more well were establishing themselves.
Yeah.
And then, of course, we didn't have anything that we could buy anywhere. And so everything that we came up with as, shall we say, remedial or medicinal or therapeutic, or even when we were hacking into our own capacity to be
Right.
able to generate outcomes by meditating and doing yoga and qigong and tai chi and using breath practice and so forth. all of that was very, very personal and had no cost. And so now we get to ask the question, why are we so addicted to waiting until we're sick?
Yeah.
And paying way too much for the solutions instead of just referring back to original science. And while the Native Americans, both South America, Middle America, and North America, did not write these things down, they handed them on by
Right.
oral.
Word of mouth, yeah.
In the India and in China and in Egypt and in Arabia and so forth, all of this was written down around 5,000 years ago, but we contemporary people think that those were primitive ideas.
Right.
And actually, what primitive means is first. It doesn't mean anything else. It doesn't mean ignorant. It doesn't mean unthoughtful. It doesn't mean not innovative. It only means first, like earliest, if you want to call it that.
Right.
So when we go back to these ancient traditions of Ayurvedic practice and Shang from China that we can actually read about, and then we go back to the Africans and the Native Americans who were less likely to write these things down, and we compare what they were doing the very same thing. So everybody was making the same discoveries and insights at about the same time over a period of somewhere around 2 million. 3 million is too much for people to even grasp.
Yeah, that's too long a time, right?
But fire was about 1 million. So we'll go to fire. And, they were probably already sitting around having conversations.
Right.
Now they're sitting around having conversations and drinking warm tea and staying up a little later and getting some of that red light energy.
The red light, yep.
Fires.
Yeah. So you talked a little bit about kind of that inside, like our internal guidance system, our as you call it, the healer within, and then also like kind of tapping into that and hacking that. Like what kind of things have come out of this ancient medicine that can, still be used today?
Yeah, well, all of it. So in other words, there's a really good word in science now. It's called interoception. Are you familiar with interoception?
No, I've not.
Yeah, so interoception is basically the modern world, modern science word for being perceptive internally. And so to be perceptive internally, because we are typically operating in what we call default modes.
Right. Yep.
So we get up, we do the same things we've always done.
Very habitual, very
worry about the same things we've always worried about,
Yep.
All of that stuff. So that when somebody causes us to, shall we say, wish we had done something different, or causes us to feel fear or frustration or embarrassment or whatever that is, we usually have a default response to that, which isn't very thoughtful or considerate. It's actually just something that we learned from other people or were caused by the traumas that were inflicted upon us by other people so that we could navigate the complexity of the circumstances. And so what interoception points to is basically just simply what we always would have called mindfulness or self-awareness. And so, for instance, any choice to do anything is eligible to be considered. Many choices to do many things are not considered, and so we just churn whatever it was that we were always churning. And usually people don't stop to think about these things until they're in some kind of a rehab situation or a prison situation or a divorce situation or some kind of a conflict that they got beat up in and they decided they probably don't want to get beat up again.
Right.
So we start to look for ways to be more, shall we say, considerate self-considerate and considerate of others.
So, I mean, really what you're talking about is the default mode network, right? It's programmed, and it over time, it just starts to run us. It's like when we're driving the car and we get home and we don't even remember the drive home. That's the default mode network. Well,
Yep.
I'm gonna pause here because we're gonna take another break. And when we come back, we're going to talk about science,
Can't
and then
wait.
we're going to talk about breathing. And I'm really excited to get to the breath, archetypal breath segment, because I'm going to learn there. And yeah, so we're going to take a break. I'm Dr. Rachelle Sweet, and you're listening to the Best Living Show. And we'll be right back, and we're going to talk science. Thank you. All right, and we're back on the Best Living Show with Dr. Rachelle Sweet and Dr. Roger Jahnke.
They're all
I hope
good.
I'm not butchering it too much. And we were just talking about the default mode network and this idea that we kind of get into routines. And I know as we age and our brain ages, we tend to, our brain kind of puts those schemas in and starts to feed them back to us. And so we become actually less aware as we get older if we're not careful, right? If we don't start, as you say, to kind of go within and wake up and start to look at that. And so how, we've talked a little bit about the Chinese ancient wisdom here, and you started to kind of unpack some of the science. How can we now take some of these ancient practices, this ancient wisdom, and put it onto our lives, our busy lives where we're running all over the place and feel stressed, and we don't know what to do.
Yeah. So first, just to say that genetics and epigenetics are very much like what the Chinese call qi, the life force energy.
Right.
And on one side, the gene is sort of like the shall we say, the internally generated mapping for
the blueprint. I call it the blueprint. Yeah.
Blueprint for successful body processing. And then the epigenetics is everything that is around us and that we do for ourselves and to ourselves.
Right.
So that's the Chinese call the gene yuan qi, which means the original qi, which is pretty much the same as our original cells. And the other is called the we'll just call it the external qi. And there are many forms of external qi, including food, water, information, etc. So how we can proceed with all of this is through the process of interoception. And the process of interoception is this kind of newish language for being very self-aware. And instead of defaulting, we learn to purposefully manifest adaptations that are, shall we say, novel to ourselves and more beneficial than our default processes.
Right.
So in other words, we become aware enough of our circumstances, and we become committed enough and disciplined enough to be able to actually say, I'm going to get a handle on some of these things that I could have done better and haven't done better yet, but I'm intending on doing better. And then things like yoga and meditation and, the vegans and the ketos are going to have comments about how that all works and so forth. And Qigong and Tai Chi are going to be in there with all of these behaviors that that make this happen. And in the Chinese version, there's what's called the three treasures.
Okay.
The three treasures are the aspect of ourself which is solid, a body.
Mm-hmm.
And then the second treasure is our knowledge and our emotions. And that's not substance. Those are more ephemeral. Energetic. And then the third treasure is our transcendental nature.
Okay.
So what Qigong does is that it creates methodologies for being able to create elixirs, that is, medicines within, for the body and for the consciousness and for the spiritual nature. And what's really cool about yoga and Qigong and Tai Chi is that the practices are always the same. So in other words, you don't have to do a different practice to be able to modify your emotional self than you would do a practice for your physical self. And the reason is because the secret of the practice is stopping everything else. So when you stop everything else and turn to the practice, whether it's for a moment or for an hour or more, what happens is that by disassociating from the complexity of the past and the future and bringing ourselves into the present with purpose and intent, the body naturally produces healing resources. And that's what we call the healer within, or the medicine within. And so the medicine within for the body is molecules and enzymes and cofactors
Hormones.
and neurotransmitters and all
Yeah.
of that. The elixir for the heart mind, which is the mental emotional aspect of the self. The word heart mind isn't the heart and it isn't the mind. It's the heart and mind when they are cooperating.
So
And
it's probably a bit like what we call coherence. Yes, the kind of
but
like that,
totally
the heart. Okay, coherence.
coherence is a very, very good word to use there. So when we do these practices, we bring ourselves into heart-mind coherence, which then puts us in touch with our essential nature, as opposed to our, shall we say, conditioned nature. And as we get more in touch with our essential self, whatever this transcendental aspect of ourself is, becomes more, shall we say, conscious
Mm.
to us. So this is integrating and bringing coherence to a relationship between the body, the mind, and the spirit. And the practice is Qigong, which has the 4 parts: body, breath, mind, and massage. So our goal here today is to then go to, well, what about the breath? What's the big deal about the breath? I'm breathing all the time.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I was going to say I do some work with heart math, which is bringing your heart into coherence with your breath, right? You
Yep.
breathe into your heart. And what that does, and I'm sure you can speak to this more, is it takes us out of that fight or flight mode, right? We're stressed, we get our system gets revved up, it turns on our limbic system, and we get into all of the hormones are flowing, and cortisol and adrenaline, and we have to be able to switch that off at some point, because it's supposed to only be for like if we're in danger and we need to run away, right? But unfortunately now with work and bills and whatever, that's all revved up most of the time. Then our breathing rate goes up, and it's like it's almost like a signal to our body that we are having that shallow kind of hyperventilation almost all the time, which is again revving up our autonomic system.
Correct.
So that coherence is a way that we can now come back into rest, right? And calm that system down. So
and they figured this out like
years ago.
years ago. And so not that there weren't dangerous situations that had to be adapted to, but just like now, then there were also times when it wasn't dangerous. And by the way, they used partying a lot to, they would have full moon party, a new moon party, an equinox, 2 equinox parties every year, and 2 solstice parties every year. That's a total of 28 parties right there.
Wow.
Fire, dance, shake it out, sing songs, honor the new births and the people who've passed on. So the point here is that the concept that breath practice has some kind of very, very unique and powerful relevance in our life, it is not a breakthrough. It is not a breakthrough. It's us actually getting a hold of ourselves, both socially as cultures, and realizing that science actually delayed our relationship with our natural self,
Mm.
and also an invitation in our personal life to actually reconsider. And as we've been saying, and as you've said probably many times to the people that you work with, I understand you're breathing all the time, but now let's look at what happens when you breathe purposefully or
Right,
consciously.
right.
And so one of the things that I've been doing, because my first yoga class was 1963. I read, I forget what the title of the book is, The Yoga of Breath or something like that, by Swami Ramacharaka when I was in high school, which was, I graduated in 1965, so I probably read that book in 1964. And I have had Native American teachers and Chinese teachers and teachers from India and so forth. And so I have been very curious about not so much, I mean, all the breath practices are great, but what are the common features that all of these multiplicity of shamanic traditions had in common? Like if you distilled that into a set of, what are all these breath practices made up of?
Right.
And so
What's the common thread, right?
yeah, so we call those um, the four archetypal breath methods, because they're common to all the cultures. And different people have different favorites, like Bostrika, the one where you breathe in really fast here, or
Okay.
um, I forget all the names, but the point is, what are those all made up of is
Right.
what we're getting at. And then there's a fifth piece to this that we call breath symphony.
Oh,
So we take
okay.
four methods, and then we basically orchestrate them into a symphony. So we'll talk about specifically each of those breath practices in our next segment. And so it's to you to either let me know what else to talk about now, or to go to the next segment.
No, I think we can take a quick break now because I'm very interested in these four archetypal breath methods, because this is really where we're going to get to inform our body through breath and create that healer within. So let's take a quick break and we'll return for a lesson in the four archetypal breath methods. All right, and welcome back to the Best Living Show. I'm your host, Dr. Rachelle Sweet, and we are talking breath and ancient wisdom, and we are talking about breathing methods next, the archetypal breath methods. We're here joined by Dr. Roger Jahnke, and he is teaching us how we are going to now learn how to affect our epigenome and how we can relax our nervous system with the power of breath.
Yeah, so here we go. Over my entire professional life, I've looked into all the shamanic traditions of breath practice. And I'm kind of like a person who distills and figures out what's a pretty easy way to be able to talk about this very complex topic. And so I have distilled all the breath practices from all the shamanic traditions into four archetypal breath methods, which are very easy to describe, and I will describe them now. They have a couple of different ways of being designated. I'm just going to say 2-part breath, 3-part breath. We have a program which is called Breath Medicine, which goes way more into detail about these things, and Rachel will probably put a link for that if you're interested.
Yep,
So
that definitely is going to be on my website, and I will put that in the show notes too.
very good. So the first one is called the 2-part breath, because you can't have a 1-part breath, because that would be an inhale or an exhale, and you got to have both to be able to survive. Your first breath typically is an inhale, and your last breath, by the way, is an exhale.
Exhale.
So
Interesting.
the
Yeah, interesting.
inhale and exhale are like the parentheses of our entire, all the volumes of our
Yeah,
breathing
wow. Yeah.
and living. And so the two-part breath is simply to breathe in and breathe out, but instead of breathing in and breathing out at a pace of 16 to 22 breaths per minute, we're going to breathe in and out at a pace that's somewhere around 5 or 6 breaths a minute. And I'll just raise my hands to say breathe in. And Qigong puts breath practice with movement, so it'll be kind of like a Qigong practice too. So breathe in.
And breathe in.
And breathe out. And usually the research shows that breathing out more slowly than breathing in has a special effect on the vagal nerve. And the vagal nerve is the part of the body that produces the choline-based neurotransmitters, which are the natural rest, regenerate, rehabilitate, etc. Neurotransmitters. So
now you mentioned like breathing 16 to 22 breaths. I mean, and to me, that sounds very fast. I've learned that you really need to be breathing quite a bit slower than that.
Well, that's where we're going. We're going to 4, 5, and 6.
Okay. Yeah. Cause I always was told try and get between 10 and 6.
Yeah. Well, the research shows that below 10, if you do it for a period of time, it will actually lower blood pressure, no matter what your blood pressure is. It goes
wow.
below 10 per minute. So then let's go on to the 3-part breath. And 3-part breath is simply to have the inhalation be 2 parts, which is a belly breath and then a chest breath. So breathe into the belly. Most people know what that means. Breathe into the belly. Now breathe into the chest. Then exhale. Very slowly.
Right.
The 4-part breath is belly, chest, hold your breath, and then exhale. So here we go. Part 1, belly. Part 2, chest. Part 3, hold. And some people can hold their breath for 3 minutes. We're only going to just hold for a few moments here. And now exhale very slowly. Now, for people who do breath practice on a regular basis, you're probably already feeling interoceptively that something is changing inside of you. Most people would just say that feels very relaxing, or I feel warm or tingly, something like that. The 5-part breath, the 4th breath, is the 5-part breath, and that's belly, chest, hold, but not very long. Exhale slowly, and then hold the breath out. So here we go. Belly, chest, hold. We'll just count to 5. Exhale very slowly, very slowly. And now hold the breath out for as long as it feels comfortable, and eventually you'll feel like I got to breathe now. Then breathe in 1 big deep breath. And then exhale very slowly, and then just breathe normally for a few moments. So that's the 4 archetypal breath methods distilled from absolutely every shamanic culture on the earth. And then what happens is that different people at different times put these together in different ways. So yoga Bhastrika is basically rapidly breathing in and breathing out, doing the 2-part breath, limiting it to the belly, and then holding as in the 4-part breath. So I'll just demonstrate that super quick as an example from India. And the belly is going in and out, and I'm just going to go like this to show that. Big breath in. Hold as long as it's comfortable. Breathe out slowly. So that's what's called in yoga Bhastrika. There's another one in yoga where you do that the thing where you different nostril, breathe in.
Yeah, the nostril breathing. Yeah.
Breathe out. Well, that's just simply the two-part breath with some other added little features.
So there's a couple of things I wanted to ask, because
sure.
I noticed you're always breathing through your nose, which I think is super important, right? Because a lot of people actually breathe through their mouth, especially, a lot now I see people like standing and they're breathing through their mouth. But we are designed, because our nose is a filter and it humidifies the air, right? That we should always be through our nose, right?
And don't forget the nitric oxide.
And nitric oxide, yes.
Because the nasal channels are exuding, like a miracle, nitric oxide. And so when you hold your breath out in the 5-part breath, what's happening is nitric oxide is building up in your nasal passages. But then you take that all in, and nitric oxide is a natural dilator. It dilates the lung alveoli, and then it gets into the blood, and it dilates the vessels, the arteries.
That's why it's lowering the blood pressure, right? Because it's helping dilate those cardiovascular.
Correct.
Last
little note is that the breath symphony is basically taking those 4 breaths, the 2-part, 3-part, 4-part, and 5-part breaths, and weaving them in any kind of way that you want to. And I've taught thousands of people to do this, and I say, like, what's your favorite breath symphony? And then they tell me, and it's always different person to person.
So people can do this is there a certain amount of time, like 1 minute, 2 minutes? What's optimal for people to do?
Well, if you don't stop everything else for a few moments, like let's say 2 to 3 minutes, it's probably you're just too hysterical to be able to get out of the default network.
Right.
But if you're in a situation and you can get a hold of yourself, use your interoception to say, pattern interrupt. I'm not going to do it that way this time. I'm going to do it. Well, what can I do to get myself in the new mode? Okay, I'll take 3 deep, slow, I'll force myself to take 3 deep, slow, relaxed breaths. And then I'll come back at this in a new way.
And is it better in the morning or in the evening? No, anytime.
No.
All right, great.
Including the middle of the night when you can't go back to sleep.
Yep, I do breathing all the time in the middle of the night. Well, this has been fantastic, and we're almost at the end of the show. And I want to make sure that people who are listening know where to find you. So let us know where they can find you and how they can learn more about these breath methods.
Yes, so I'll just give the website, iiqtc.org. That's easy enough. And the breath product, I guess you would call it, it's a library of videos that we have. Is called Breath Medicine. And that's available at that website. And the link for that is probably in the show notes.
Yes, I'm going to have in the show notes. It's going to be on my website, drrachelsweet.com. And I have a question for you before we end. What do you do for yourself to intentionally thrive?
Well, I have a daily practice where I do either Tai Chi, Qigong, or Kung Fu. They say that old people should do Tai Chi and young people should do Kung Fu. I think that's backwards.
Okay.
Old people should do Kung Fu and young people should learn how to slow down. And then I make compost. Everything that's compostable that we have in our house ever, including paper, goes into our compost pile. And then I garden and grow vegetables, high fiber, super for either vegan or for keto type diets.
Right.
And I trim fruit trees.
Wow, that's so much. And you drink mushroom tea.
And my colleagues and I train Qigong and Tai Chi teachers. I should definitely say that.
Yeah. Awesome. So that's so wonderful to have you on the show. Thank you for being on the Best Living Show today.
You
And
are so
I
welcome. I
will
was
make
happy to be
sure,
here.
and I will make sure that everybody knows how to find you. And you can visit drrachelsweet.com for a replay of the show and the show notes that you can find all about the ancient breathing methods and more about ancient Chinese medicine. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rachel. I wish you well. Take care
All
now.
right. Take care. Thanks for listening to the Best Living Show. I'm your host, Dr. Rachelle Sweet. Breathe, eat, sleep, thrive in every aspect of your life on transformationtalkradio.com. Tune in Thursdays at 6 p.m. to continue your new narrative and step into a new way of being. We are not what people have told us we are. We are so much more than that. I'm going to help you thrive and get the answers you desire, not only in the external world, but on the inside. For more information, go to drrachelsweet.com. That's drrachelsweet.com.